Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Export Promotion and International Trade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed with great pleasure that I too rise virtually in the House of Commons today in support of our proposed legislation to ratify the agreement on trade continuity between Canada and the United Kingdom. Just as we welcomed the recent signing of this important agreement, the government is very pleased to take the next step towards ratification so that Canadian exporters can take full advantage of the agreement's benefits. As you know, Canada and the United Kingdom have historically enjoyed advantageous commercial relations that we've built together over more than 150 years. Two-way merchandise trade between us amounted to $29 billion in 2019, making the UK Canada's fifth largest trading partner after the United States, China, Mexico, and Japan. In fact, Canadian exports to the UK have increased by over $2 billion since the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA as it's commonly known, was provisionally applied in 2017. So preserving this trading relationship means businesses will continue to have unprecedented access to the UK's 66 million consumers and $3.68 trillion market. It also means lower prices and more choices for Canadian consumers, and either a reduction or complete elimination of customs duties. And because this agreement is based on CETA, an agreement Canadians are already very familiar with, it provides the predictability and the stability our businesses have told us they need as they grapple with the uncertainty brought on by this global pandemic. Les avantages de l'accord de continuité commerciale pour les Canadiens sont concrets et considérables. Une fois que l'accord est pleinement mis en œuvre, il poursuivra l'élimination des droits de douane de l'AECG sur 99% des produits canadiens exportés vers le Royaume-Uni. Il protégera pleinement tous les producteurs canadiens soumis à la gestion de l'offre. Il conservera l'accès prioritaire au marché pour les fournisseurs de services canadiens, y compris l'accès au marché d'approvisionnement public du gouvernement britannique, dont la valeur estimé à environ 118 milliards de dollars par année. Il continuera à balancer la protection des investisseurs et la prérogative du Canada de réglementer dans l'intérêt du public et il maintiendra et préservera les normes et les standards élevés de l'AECG en matière de travail et de protection de l'environnement. Cet accord continuera également à donner aux entreprises canadiennes un avantage sur leurs concurrents des autres pays qui n'ont pas d'accord de libre-échange avec le Royaume-Uni. Indeed, Canadians welcomed the news of this agreement and the successful work of our negotiating team. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I would like to expand on how critical our successful negotiation of this agreement is for Canadian agri-food and agriculture industry. Quebec is the home of the most dairy farmers in the country, and it is followed by Ontario, then Alberta, and British Columbia. We know that farmers working hard right across this country wanted and needed the stability that this agreement provides. This is also the case for our beef producers. The first thought that comes to mind for me is the incredible beef exported out of Alberta and Ontario. I had the opportunity to engage directly with our beef producers and cattle feeders prior to the conclusion of the negotiations to hear their needs and interests and make sure that they were taken into account. I'd also like to give much credit to the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, or CAFTA. As Claire Citeau of CAFTA said during her testimony before the International Trade Committee, and I quote, "This is an important first step to ensuring that exporters preserve the existing access and benefits that are already in place. The temporary certainty and stability that a transitional agreement provides is welcome news for some of our members, and the reason we call on parliamentarians to work together to pass this agreement." I am urging all members to listen to the call of our agriculture sector to swiftly ratify this agreement. Mr. Speaker, we have some incredible associations representing the interests of our Canadian farmers and producers. They are engaged, they are well informed, they are targeted, and they are in constant contact with us as they should be. Their engagement has been critical, and I certainly look forward to continuing to work with them in the next phase of the negotiation process towards a comprehensive bilateral trade agreement. Pour nos producteurs laitiers, j'aimerais souligner le succès que représente cet accord. il n'y aura pas une seule once de fromage étranger supplémentaire qui entrera au pays en vertu de cet accord de libre-échange. Comme l'a très bien dit Daniel Gobeil, président des producteurs laitiers du Québec, et je cite, « Le gouvernement n'a accordé aucun accès supplémentaire au Royaume-Uni conformément à l'engagement qui avait été pris par le premier ministre et la ministre de l'Agriculture. Je remercie donc le gouvernement d'avoir respecté son engagement. Cela démontre clairement qu'il est possible de conclure des accords commerciaux sans que la gestion de l'offre soit sacrifiée. » Canadian small and medium-sized businesses have also been very vocal, and what they told us they needed most at this time, this turbulent time of crisis, is stability. Stability in their trading relationships, stability in exporting their products, and this agreement fully delivers. Monsieur le Président, l'accord de continuité commerciale permettra à de nombreuses entreprises canadiennes qui en sont venues à dépendre de leurs clients au Royaume-Uni de ne pas subir un revers inutile. Sans cet accord, certaines entreprises canadiennes seraient confrontées à de nouveaux obstacles et à des coûts plus élevés pour faire affaire. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly paint a picture of what would have resulted if our government had not been as successful as it was, and if we had been unable to conclude a transitional trade agreement with the UK. It is estimated that over $1 billion worth of Canadian exports to the UK would have been subject to tariffs, and these tariffs would disproportionately affect our fish, seafood, and agriculture exporters. In addition to the tariffs placed on Canadian products being exported to the UK, roughly 25% of all products imported from the UK would also be affected, with Canadian importers paying higher prices to bring in those goods. Goods, Mr. Speaker, that often our Canadian companies need in order to operate, in order to produce, in order to grow. Once ratified, the Trade Continuity Agreement will continue to be in place as we work towards a new bilateral, comprehensive free trade agreement with the UK. Indeed, this continuity agreement stipulates explicitly that within 1 year of ratification by both countries, the UK and Canada must come back to the negotiating table in order to conclude a comprehensive, longer-term trade agreement. I know that the Minister and I look forward to leading a broad consultation process with Canadians from right across the country and in different sectors of our economy to ensure that these future negotiations are directed in the best interests of Canada and that they respond to any post-Brexit developments. With the time that I have remaining, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to some of the broader implications of our work as a government on international trade. Mr. Speaker, our Canadian government has been a leader among nations globally in advocating for free trade and stemming the tide of protectionist leanings. Indeed, we believe, on the contrary, that strong global trade partnerships, like our new agreement with the United Kingdom, are increasingly necessary and important, especially in these uncertain times, especially as other countries are looking to turn inward. I am therefore asking all members from all parties to support Bill C-18's timely ratification and passage, and in so doing, carefully consider not only the importance of this particular agreement for our Canadian farmers and producers, for our Canadian SMEs and all our exporters, big and small, but also for the message that it sends to the world. The message it sends to the world about the importance of keeping trade open, the importance of keeping Canada at the forefront of the advocacy on free trade. History will thank us for it, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. La députée de Jonquière.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. J'ai écouté attentivement la secrétaire parlementaire et on sait que c'est un accord transitoire. Et on sait aussi que les producteurs de fromage anglais vont vouloir des parts de marché qui sont plus importantes. Donc, j'ai l'impression qu'on repousse le problème à l'an prochain, à la prochaine année. On avait proposé une solution, nous, au Bloc québécois, c'est de faire une exception avec la gestion de l'offre, ce qui réglerait définitivement, dans le contexte des accords commerciaux, ce problème-là. Si le passé est garant de l'avenir, constamment, la gestion de l'offre a été une monnaie d'échange et pour les conservateurs et pour les libéraux. Est-ce que ma collègue serait d'accord avec moi pour dire que la meilleure solution, ce serait probablement de faire en sorte qu'il y ait une exception pour la gestion de l'offre dans les négociations d'accords commerciaux? Merci.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire de la ministre du Commerce international.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie mon collègue pour cette question. Personnellement, je trouve que le succès que nous avons eu dans l'accord transitoire devrait être quelque chose dont le Bloc québécois et tous les Québécois devraient se réjouir. Je suis très fière et très contente de pouvoir amener ce succès-là dans l'entente. Le fait que nous avons préservé la gestion de l'offre, nous avons protégé nos producteurs laitiers. Comme j'ai dit, nous avons discuté de ça en comité et je crois que nos producteurs sont contents de l'accord transitoire que nous avons conclu.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to ask the parliamentary secretary, I mean, I remember in the last parliament, one of the real questions around the timing of the government's adoption of CETA at that time was that the Brexit vote was pending, and certainly there were New Democrats. In fact, I believe I myself got up in the House and questioned the wisdom of concluding a trade deal with Europe when our largest trading partner in Europe was about to leave the bloc. Now we're in a position where we're being asked to kind of rubber stamp a carbon copy of CETA for all intents and purposes, designed for a European trading bloc, and if and when a successor agreement is concluded, 40% of the trade that Canada has done with Europe is going to be outside of CETA. Does the government think that this has any consequence or ramification for CETA? Is there anything that ought to have been different in CETA, given that the UK is no longer going to be part of that trading bloc?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question coming from my colleague, but I'm sure as he understands and as all parliamentarians understand, when we negotiate a trade agreement with our global allies, we do so on the basis of the history and the circumstances as they are at the time. It was the right move for Canada to conclude CETA at that time. It allowed us to grow our economy. It allowed us to export to a greater degree with our allies in Europe. And as I mentioned, since CETA was provisionally applied in 2017, we have increased our trade by $2 billion with the United Kingdom. So yes, I do think it was an important step and a good move on Canada's part.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I ask my question, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her remarks and her work to help develop some of the economic measures in response to the COVID-19 emergency. One of the faults I find that folks like us who are involved in politics fall into is that we often discuss trade in a way that doesn't resonate with people who live in our communities. When we talk about GDP growth or export volumes, that's often a step removed from the people who are benefiting from these trade agreements and may not even realize. The parliamentary secretary mentioned in her remarks the impact on seafood tariffs. In my community, this is going to ensure that we get a higher price for our seafood products, which will encourage young people to join the industry and continue to work in rural communities. I'm curious if she can give examples of how the trade agreements will actually lead to having people be better off in her community here in Canada.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his question and all of his work on the economic measures in response to COVID-19. And I would like to say that one of the big successes of this continuity agreement is certainly for our seafood producers, for our exporters of lobster and seafood, who will benefit greatly, I understand, and I'm very pleased about that. In my community, for example, I have a lot of very innovative tech companies economies, and I know that they are looking to new markets, and they were very pleased by the ratification of CUSMA, and are looking to export into the United States for the first time now. And with this agreement, we'll be exporting into the United Kingdom as well. So I think that this is of benefit to many different sectors of the economy, from tech and innovation to manufacturers, and of course to our agriculture and seafood exporters.
Resuming debate.